Well, welcome to Storytime 67, our September story for 2023. We have a couple of show and tell kind of topics. The first of which is, why do we have so many blank? And my little examples up here, I've got some fly swats, and I don't know why, but they did just come in a pack of 6. So we haven't accumulated these fly swats. This is just how they came. And I've also got some tins of peaches. They're a lot less than they used to be, but this is kind of a silly story where we occasionally get a grocery order of heavy things that are hard for us to go and get on foot in our bags or in trolley. And so we were getting every now and again an order from Asda. And we bought a variety of canned fruit, preserved fruit in these orders. But on like 3 occasions in a row, they didn't have the apples or the cherries or whatever else I'd ordered. So they substituted extra peaches. And so instead of getting, like I'd ordered 5, each time I got 10 or 15 cans of peaches until we ended up with 35, 40 cans of tinned peaches. Luckily, we had a cellar at the time, so it wasn't so much of an issue. Anyway, so that's my peach story. And my last one is, what are those?
Hard drive.
Power banks?
External hard drives.
They're external hard drives. These are hard drives full of files from stories and exhibitions and photography sessions that I've done, all sorts, and they are mostly quite full. So I guess the answer to why do I have so many hard drives is why do I have so many files? And there are a few really cute pictures of things that people have a lot of in their houses sent to the chats, which I'll save and do a little slideshow so people can see if that's all right, because they're fun.
Great. Yeah, they're fun. I'll just show you. This is, let's see if that works.
They're all
old keys, and some of them I don't know what they're from. They're maybe my mum's house or whatever. But one of them, I did actually go through them at one stage because we got a new screen door put on the front. But I have never had to carry around, to my knowledge, a copy of our key for the front door, which is a hard wooden door before the security screen door. And I found one. That's the very disreputable looking.
Oh, that's what that key is. It's for your front door that you normally just have a key in because there's a security door over the top.
That's right. That's right.
So there was a spare key for that, and you discovered
there was a spare key. Baron's just saying we must get you a copy of the front door key. You've never had a copy of the front door key. And in fact, I had. I just didn't
do you
know.
have that, Dad, on your keyring? A copy of that key?
Yeah,
the big
already had that. Here's the other key story, though. Look at this one.
This is a car key. Did you find?
No, this is the device they gave us when we got the electric car.
Yeah.
It just sits in your wallet. You don't have to do anything with it. You just walk up to the car,
Yep.
and the car opens for you, and all the rest of it. We had this thing where we didn't use the car for a few weeks, and the battery went flat. So this wouldn't work because pressing buttons. So we got the RAA, and he came out, and he did this, and I didn't even know it was there. I still can't get it out.
Oh, in the mess. Okay, so the picture that you sent to the chat, which I can show, is the part that pulls out, is it?
Yeah, but I can't get it out.
And that's a manual key, isn't it?
That's a manual key.
Yeah, you just went up to the car, stuck it in, opened the door. And I've called the RAA because I can't get my car started or get in it. And it turns up in the
You know there's this manual key hidden inside.
But the
well, that's very clever, and I'm glad to think there is a manual fallback. Because I often think about these things, like what happens when the battery doesn't work or when the power's out or, the digital screen's not working or whatever. Anyway, so the other sort of show and tell topic was the one really nice or useful thing you find when you're doing a clean out of other stuff. And I've just brought this little thing along because when I cleaned out stuff to move up to Sheffield, I found this. And if you know what this is, thank you very much for being a lovely fan of Feathers, Wooden String. This is the original drawing that I did for an EP cover some years back, but it now goes on our rabbit wall, which this is a light enough little flimsy frame that I can get away with putting it up with sticky command strips and it doesn't fold back down.
Mine was the front door key. That was the one useful thing.
Yeah.
All the other keys appear to be from, you know, ancient houses or cupboards that I don't know about.
Yes.
But that one is quite nice, so we didn't have to get a copy. So that's good.
And I was very pleased to find Jamie's set of shelves because they took me back to a house probably 2 houses ago where it used to be proudly displayed and had our keys on it. And then it disappeared. It disappeared for a while, and I didn't find it. But I found it in a box of lovely things of theirs. So I've taken photographs and sent them around. What do you want to keep? What do you want to lose? And I said, but this one's for me. So it's now very, very happily in my little shed, holding on to very important bits and pieces.
Nice.
He was excited. So yeah, very useful.
Have you found anything useful or nice when cleaning things out, Tegan? Or Camilla, if you're there in the background.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Occasionally, Dad brings things over when he's doing a clean out and being like, we don't need this at our place, but you might like this.
Which may or may not actually be useful.
Yes. Yes. Some things are like, I made this as a child for you for Christmas, and I don't particularly need it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever found anything actually useful. When we always end up doing this thing where we have a clean out and like, you know, you like find a pair of sunglasses or like a hat or something and you end up wearing it. So like me and my partner Ben will just be walking around the house with like hats and sunglasses and scarves that we've like found somewhere and just kind of like put on. Just we ended up in like a fancy dress outfit while we're tidying.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I forgot about this, and you just kind of like stick it on.
Yep.
So yeah, but never anything useful. Yeah, that's probably why it was buried in the box.
So we had quite a lot of other topics this time. I had kind of thought up and added a couple of things that I felt fitted in, and then I said, are there any more? And there were a couple more. So we've ended up with quite a lot, but they all fit together quite nicely. So our other topics were inventive uses for excess packaging. When you think something you have, use, take, or do is addressing a problem or helping with something, but actually it's not doing anything at all. Multitasking, the sort of official consultant friend who's the one person in the group who can do something in particular and everyone else goes to them for that. I added in on different schedules, just sort of, you know, when either because of you're actually in different time zones or because you just operate very differently, you don't really work on the same schedule as someone else. Extended celebrations. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Trying to do something for an animal's own good, but they don't understand and they hate you.
Yeah, we know that one.
Planning to go to an event despite knowing it's going to be difficult, the weather's going to be awful, etc. Why do people do this? Completely opposite reactions to taking part in a challenging event. You know, this was great, I did it, versus I am never doing that again. And the final one that I added, when you tell everyone that you don't like something, only to later discover that you actually do. And the reason I put this in, actually it's happened on 2 occasions to me recently. I have always said, people ask me, what's your favorite tea? This is a sort of silly question for me because I like all tea. And so my response is usually, I like everything, except if it has berries in it. I do not like teas with fruits or berries in it. And then by accident, when buying some spicy, sort of spiced orange chai stuff that we like, I picked up the Morrison's berry tea and I got it home and realized instead of 2 boxes of orange tea, I had an orange tea and a berry tea. And I went, oh no, I hate berry tea. And then I tried it and I liked this Morrison's berry tea. It seems to be a thing they make it with blackberry or bramble leaves in it. And this seems to make the flavor a little bit different and it's quite nice. But then P had this tea that they got in the UK and took back to China. And it's a berry tea, which is raspberry, with lemon and a hint of rose. And they're sort of saying, I'm having this in preference to a tea with caffeine, you know, it's really, really nice. And I was like, well, it looks pretty. The packet looks so pretty. Yeah, I'm going to get it and try it and say that I'm having the same tea. You know, I'm probably not going to like it. Well, guess what? I really like it. So that's partly where that came from. And then the other day, the same thing happened with capers. I always say I don't like capers. And Lloyd bought some because we bought a whole lot of pickled things to make meals in the hot weather without really cooking much. And he got some capers and I went, oh, capers. And then I tried them and I really liked them. So I'm having a bit of a time with that at the moment. So I thought I'd put that in as the topic. And we also had a request for the character Pandora, who famously has a lot of teas and associated paraphernalia. But to begin with, I have a little poem called All Along, and this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one, including quite a few of those topics from our list. They said as long as I had the right rigid laces, no blisters would bother me. They said calendula would settle my skin, carrots were easy to grow, and the pasta wouldn't boil over with the spoon in. Yet somehow I find myself asking, why didn't you tell me this sooner? While reading the fine print or Googling the bits no one told me about these solutions. And wondering why I have 10 different kinds of glasses and fly traps and braces and shakers and cables and pen grips and lids and versions of rigid shoelaces. They came in big boxes with paper and foam falling out, packing peas on the floor. I chopped and I vacuumed, made box forts and statues, but blast it, there was still more. And some months later, while cleaning the corners and crates full of too many things, throwing out plastic, picking up pebbles, how did this get in here, I'd think? Right at the back, in a box with new shine, still on its stickers and labels, I found tucked inside where my now worn shoes went, the correct pair of rigid shoelaces. The shoes are really less blistery now that they're laced with them. Perhaps they weren't lying. I guess it could be that I might not have really listened. So today's story is called Pandora's Chaos. Wurst contemplated the slope of Pan's back as she knelt in the open door of the wardrobe. It was unusual for Pandora to be attired in such ferret-climbable clothing as a hoodie and leggings. Being a ferret, Wurst did not have much interest in Pan's reasons for shedding her typical shawls and floaty blouses and skirts. He did, however, have an interest in her usefulness as a ramp, via which to reach the shelf at the top of the closet, which housed a variety of interesting-looking boxes and stacks of objects. Pan was busy pulling things out of the dark, musty back corners that lurked below the coats and dresses on the hanging rail, and had not realized that Wurst had entered the room. It was only reasonable, Wurst thought, to announce his presence by helping her to remove all the objects from the shelf above her. After all, this shelf would be difficult for her to reach, and her goal was clearly to take everything out anyway. If any of the items at the top of the wardrobe turned out to be of particular interest, Wurst would have the opportunity to drag them away and hide them before Pan could throw them out. Wurst backed up a bit, then shot forward, bounding up the arc of Pan's slouched spine and launching himself from the back of her neck, managing to hook both front feet over the shelf and pulling himself up. Pan made a noise like, "Wurst!" So Wurst, quick to hide himself amongst the pile of objects the shelf held, wriggling inside a shallow box on which the lid was slightly ajar. Flattening his long sausage length down inside the box, Wurst lifted his head just enough to peer through the gap under the lid, his eyes focusing with beady suspicion on the top of Pandora's dark bird's nest of a messy bun. Pan lifted her head to look up at the top of the wardrobe in dismay. Today had been full of bad omens. For example, when she had tried to start on the kitchen cupboards, she had found not one, not two, but 3 jars of instant coffee powder. Pan believed that when something came up 3 times, it meant something. A message from the universe. And this one had not been a good start to her day. Before she left for Germany to visit her tante Ada, Florrie had given Pan something of an ultimatum. Pan, she'd sighed, her freckled arms folded across her daisy-patterned blouse. Your presence in my home was not really supposed to be permanent, you know. I said it wouldn't hurt to have a flatmate in the UK while I did my internship. I didn't say that I needed a housemate forever when I came back to Australia. You've moved house with me 3 times now, and every time we move, you seem to have more stuff to jam into every storage space we've got. It's like Pandora's chaos. You being here is one thing. I admit, company's nice. But if you're going to stay with me my entire life, I really have to ask that you do a clean out every once in a while. You spook my dates enough on your own, let alone with your 14 shawls hanging on the coat rack like bats and blocking the light in the entranceway, and your herbs drying, or rather going mouldy, in the spare wardrobe, and your 25 teapots taking up the entire end of the dining table where someone else could sit. You know I can't find anything at the best of times, let alone with clutter. While I'm away in Germany, please think about it. If you really need all this stuff, maybe you need your own house. And if you don't, then please sort it out before I come back. Florrie had delivered this tirade in a mild, friendly tone, but in Pan's own mind, she'd been decisively shouted at. Why didn't you tell me you felt this way earlier? She'd asked, blinking at Florrie in disbelief. I imagined that for someone who reads omens and tea leaves daily, it would be rather obvious, Florrie had replied. But it wasn't obvious to Pan at all, because Florrie herself had been delivered into Pan's superstitious life as an omen, turning up 3 times, choosing the same flight, the same bookcase, and even the same apartment building, despite both Pan and her being, at the time, on the other side of the world. She lacked abilities Pan had in spades, and had those Pan lacked herself, their existences flitting around each other in a way that seemed as meant to be as the omen had suggested. In the many years since that they'd shared various homes, Florrie's colourful assortment of dates, other friends, and even her tante Ada had come and gone, flitting in and out of her life on the tides of work and other commitments and other friends and family. But Pan had stayed. She thought that was worth something. So here she was, putting her best effort into a clean-out. And because this task came far from naturally, allowing herself to multitask by baking fortune cookies, listening to an audiobook about forgotten underground passages and vaults, and assembling a 3,000-piece puzzle depicting a castle ruins as she located the pieces one by one amongst the mess. The instant coffee, an affront to Pan's dedication to hand-blended loose-leaf tea, could mean many things. That was the trouble with omens. It could be Florrie's, which could mean that Pan was wasting her efforts in doing this clean out. If Florrie was developing a taste for instant coffee, then they were growing apart, and no amount of considerate storage and sorting would mend the rift growing between them. It could, however, also reflect the presence of a new visitor. Florrie dating someone new who she hadn't mentioned, or perhaps Ada leaving her mark behind after a recent visit. The uncertain nature of the omen meant that there was really nothing to do but carry on tidying and hope for the best. The best being, Pan supposed, that the coffee belonged to Ada. Wurst threw a pool noodle flotation device out of the wardrobe onto Pan's head at this juncture, and she sighed and placed it in the probably Florrie's pile before tucking her head to her chest. Wurst had jumped on her as a means of getting up or down off things twice already today. She might as well be prepared for the third and consider the meaning of the omen later. But the ferret did not jump down onto Pan's back, instead dragging and nudging a small box towards the edge of the shelf. Hearing the sound of this, Pan looked up. No, she objected too late, as the box came careening down towards her nose. Pan leaned back into a limbo-like pose and brought her hands up to catch the object with an agility that she found surprising. She didn't think yoga normally prepared people for catching flying objects. Sitting back on the carpet, Pan eased the lid of the box open, expecting to find some herbs she'd dried months ago and forgotten about, or another teapot that she would be obliged to line up against the rest and try to choose between them. But instead, she saw inside the artistically carved wooden pieces of a 3D puzzle sculpture. Pan picked up the pieces, one by one, assembling the little spiral shape on the floor beside her as she went. It was the first good omen of the cleanup. Florrie had bought this at IKEA, on the second occasion that the two of them had run into each other, and somehow Pan had ended up with one of the pieces amongst her own IKEA purchases. It remained a mystery why Florrie would choose to buy such a thing, which she would never have assembled on her own. Pan had considered it one of the signs that they were supposed to meet. She'd assembled it for Florrie, and it had sat in a position of pride in their UK flat. It must have never made it out of the box upon their return. Pan was just trying to pick up the completed puzzle, realizing her error in putting it together on the floor, when Wurst did jump down on her, bringing an assortment of objects from the top of the wardrobe with him. At the same time, the kitchen smoke alarm began shrieking. Pan leapt up, cursing, and both the 3D puzzle and the 3,000-piece castle puzzle were bumped and fell into disarray. What does it mean if you burn fortune cookies? Pan demanded of the universe, leaving Wurst to whatever mischief he pleased as she rushed to open the kitchen windows. Wurst disentangled himself from a string of fairy lights and began dragging a long poster tube across the floor in the direction of his hidey house in the lounge room. It would make an excellent additional tunnel, and Pan would most likely let him keep it, unlike Florrie, who did not approve of Wurst's inclination to take things that were not intended for him. Wurst understood that Florrie was supposed to be his main human. However, he also understood that he and Florrie tolerated one another more than having any particular bond. Pan, on the other hand, Wurst quite liked. She tended to laugh rather than saying, "You're the worst," when she found him in unexpected places. She had a lot of long, draping items of clothing which Wurst could climb, hide in, and pop out of on the coat rack or in the wardrobe to take the humans by surprise. And if Wurst claimed something as his own, Pan would shrug and declare it a lost cause, rather than engaging in the vicious tug-of-war matches that were a frequent feature of his relationship with Florrie. Wurst did not understand what Florrie had said to Pan before she left. Ferret social interactions were largely categorized as nice or nasty, based on whether the other party had bitten you hard or wiped their rear end on your favourite spot in the house. But he did understand that A, Pan was sad about whatever had happened, and B, she had started to remove some of the excellent draped fabric hideouts on the coat rack and other surfaces soon afterward. He was, therefore, determined to put a stop to Pan's sad mood by surprising her. This usually seemed to be effective. And to her attempts to remove good hiding places by getting in the way of the removal activities. Since Pan had rushed out of the room, Wurst placed his poster tube in the doorway of his hideout and then went in pursuit to see what he could do about her activities in the kitchen. Pan was tipping some things that smelt like smoke into the bin off of a tray. Wurst liked the bins. They were fun to climb in and out of, and because they slid open like a drawer, you could hide inside and burst out at the humans or other animals as they passed. Wurst was considering secreting himself in the bin now, when Pan looked at him and made a sound like, "Woof!" kneeling down to inspect him. Pan grimaced as she reached out to take hold of Wurst's wriggly form. A furry, wriggly sausage that was, for some reason, covered in what looked like craft glue, paint, and beanbag beans. "Where did you get all this?" she demanded, holding the ferret up to her eye level. Wurst looked back at her, with what she thought was a show of innocent confusion, although ferret expressions were still something of a mystery to her. Discovering the source of the glue, paint, and worryingly loose beanbag filler was going to have to wait until Wurst was less of a magnet for small objects. "I'm sorry, Wurst," Pan told him. "You're going to need a wash and a brush, and possibly some of your fur trimmed off." Wurst continued to gaze back at her with innocent, questioning eyes, and Pan felt very mean as she carried him into the bathroom and partially filled the sink, as she'd seen Florrie do. Wurst wriggled out of her grip and climbed onto her head while she searched the bathroom cabinet for his special shampoo. It was a crowded cabinet with a lot of both her things and Florrie's things. Pan considered the contents, feeling that the balance of ownership of the clutter here was approximately even, and Florrie was a bit extreme, blaming Pan for their lack of free storage space. Locating Wurst's ferret shampoo behind 5 different sized loofahs that neither she or Florrie used, why were there 5? Pan stood up, and Wurst grabbed one of the loofahs and ran off out of the bathroom and down the hallway with it. "Wurst, no!" Pan jumped up, switched off the tap, and chased after the ferret, who was shedding beanbag beans and glitter as he went, leaving a very small winter wonderland-like trail in his wake. Pan had a feeling she was about to have her first tug of war with Wurst. She also had a feeling that Wurst was about to stop liking her quite so much. These predictions were accurate and far more precise than many of Pan's omens. Wurst could make no sense of it. One moment, this human was tolerant and amused. The next, she was pulling the very satisfying net ball out of his jaws and forcing him to go in the water. He splashed as much of it as he could onto her hoodie. If he was lucky, perhaps this would cause Pan to get changed into the floaty, drapey sort of clothing she normally wore that was so satisfying to tangle up. But no such luck. And she wanted to dry him with the hot air machine. She was dreaming if she thought she could hold him still with one hand. Wurst bit her on the finger, and Pan went, "Ah!" and let him go. Then she ran out of the room again, because she'd made another tray of those smoky-smelling things that she kept putting in the bin. and the horrible loud shrieker in the ceiling was going off. Wurst went and hid under the bed, taking 3 of the 5 net ball things from the cupboard with him. He'd changed his mind. He did not prefer this human. She was dreadful, and this was war. Pan sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of her chamomile blend and surveyed the house around her, despondent. So far, she'd managed to pull all of the contents out of the wardrobe and leave them on the floor instead, empty the bathroom cabinet by accident and lose 3 loofahs, burn 2 batches of biscuits, find 3 jars of instant coffee that may or may not mean she and Florrie were no longer bound by fate, and make an enemy of Florrie's ferret. Florrie was right. Pan had gone from once being the strange owner of Pandora's tea drawer to being the creator of Pandora's wardrobe, Pandora's kitchen, and Pandora's chaotic life. How she was supposed to get all this under control by the time Florrie returned was beyond her, especially since her efforts to multitask had so far resulted in lost puzzle pieces, burnt fortune cookies, and a glue and paint covered ferret. This was officially the worst week ever and could not possibly get worse at all. And then her phone buzzed with a message from Kasey to the group chat. It said, "What's up, folks? It's my birthday soon, so I'm planning a few things to celebrate. First up, I was hoping to have a plant swap barbecue on the 14th. Let me know if the date works. Second, there's this fun run on the 7th, raising money for cancer research, and I was hoping some of you might enter a team with me. Let me know." Pan looked at the message and groaned. It was no secret that she hated running, right? Kasey would understand if she didn't do that. But the trouble was, Kasey might not understand, because Kasey had been friends with Florrie since the 2 of them were at primary school together, and yet it was clear that Kasey didn't know that Florrie was in Germany until a week after both of these suggested birthday events. As if on cue, the 3 dots of someone typing appeared, and a reply from Florrie popped up. "Why didn't you send this earlier? I'm in Germany until the 21st. Would have made my travel dates work around it." Kasey would be sad. Also, the run was for charity. Also, their supposed gym friends would definitely try to get out of it, preferring yoga over anything so vigorous. Pan tried to do a dramatic face plant onto the table and head-butted her dainty cup of tea, which tipped over and caused a domino effect with 2 glasses of half-drunk water and a mug of something cold and suspiciously coffee-scented that Pan probably should have washed up by now. "Ah!" Pan yelled at it. "Why won't you let me pretend you don't exist?" She rescued her phone, which had somehow avoided having any beverages spilt on it, and typed a reply before she could talk herself out of it. "I'll do it, Kasey. You know I'm not a runner, so don't expect speed. Also, Florrie, you're awake? What time is it in Germany? And any idea why we have 5 loofahs, 3 half-drunk drinks on the table, and 6 umbrellas in the wardrobe? Pretty sure none of those were caused by Pandora's chaos." Pan almost added, "Whose is the instant coffee?" in all caps, but she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer yet. Then Kasey wrote, "Why didn't you tell me you were going to Germany when you planned it?" And this resulted in a long exchange of apologies, promises of seed and plant cutting exchanges, and Kasey agreeing that she would have a birthday month and hold her plant swap barbecue after Florrie got back. Pan's questions about the items in the house that were, perhaps, Florrie's fault were forgotten. Kasey sent to Pan, "Wanna train together? I'm going to practice the course since it's nearby, 6 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday." Pan blinked at the message. Was she reading it right? Had Kasey typed it right? Eventually, she sent back, I think we exist on different schedules. What is 6 a.m.? And Kasey returned a cheeky face emoji that left Pan unsure if she was, in fact, now expected to go running at a time that she considered to be the middle of the night. Meanwhile, in the laundry, Wurst was working on his project, which was to break the lid off of the automatic feeder that Florrie had set up with the assurance to Pan that it would save her needing to measure out his food. Pan had so far not noticed his progress at levering up the lid and had blamed herself for the fact that it had cracked in one spot, patching it with gaffer tape. Wurst had been a little bit sorry before that Pan felt bad when she saw the crack, but now that she had shown herself to be a toy-stealing, bath-enforcing traitor, he was rather pleased. It meant that as he did more damage to the feeder, Pan would just think that she was breaking it when she opened and closed it to add more ferret kibble. She would have no knowledge of his true plans until after he had gained access to the multiple servings held in the timed release chamber. Now that he'd found a flat plastic stick in the desk drawer that made a perfect lever, this wouldn't be long. The actual outcome, when Pan came into the laundry later to find that the feeder had tipped over, popped open, and was empty, was even better than Wurst had imagined. Pan said, "Oh, I thought I topped it up this morning. I'm sorry, Wurst." And clearly feeling very guilty, refilled the holding container and replaced the lid. Pan's memory, Wurst realized, was not her strong suit, especially now that she was so busy moving everything in the house around. Wurst knew how all the days could blur into one when you had to keep spending them putting back treasures that someone kept taking elsewhere. It took Pan 3 days to realize that the mischievous ferret was opening the storage compartment and eating far more than his perfectly measured share. She wasn't sure how to explain this to Florrie, who still thought the device was providing a perfect solution to controlling how much Wurst got fed. She was going to have to tell her, though, because Wurst's break-ins had resulted in them going through quite a bit more of his kibble than they should have. She would have to ask how to order more. Florrie, of course, was unimpressed. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" she demanded on the phone. It probably didn't help that Pan had accidentally called her at 5:30 a.m. German time. "It took me a while to work out what was happening," Pan confessed. "I thought I'd been forgetting to top it up." Florrie was quiet for a moment. "You definitely haven't just been forgetting to top it up, right?" "No," sighed Pan. "He's an evil genius. I witnessed him pulling the lid off today." "Oh," Florrie replied. "Okay, well, you'll have to give him less the next few days, which he's not going to like." Pan groaned. "Okay. And you can order some more on the website. If you go on the computer with my login, it's bookmarked." Pan didn't need to ask Florrie for her login details. They'd lived together long enough that getting things that were stored on Florrie's computer for her was something Pan had had to do before. What she hadn't encountered before was that everything on Florrie's computer was in German, including the text within her browser. Florrie must have been practicing for being in Germany. Pan liked uploading the odd selfie to Instagram and doing the basics of finding and buying things, such as new teas and skull-shaped earrings online. But she was not sure how to reset the display language of a computer. Luckily, Kasey, who lived close by, had become a bit of a tech whiz since being declared an influencer, and was now called upon by everyone in their friendship circle as their IT expert. So rather than Google what to do on her phone, Pan sent Kasey a message asking her to come over. Kasey arrived with Andi in tow today. Andi was the local postie and unofficial handy person. Kasey had met Andi when Andi offered to help build her home gym furniture and her fence by way of leaving a note on a missed parcel slip. Andi said she wanted Kasey to have less problems and more time to do her floristry, which Kasey loved. Andi had also delivered parcels to Florrie and Pan, but she hadn't offered to do any handy person jobs for them. Pan thought Andi's interactions with Kasey sounded a bit on the attempting to be romantic side, but Kasey denied any such vibes and was not the type to demand that Andi communicate her intentions. Whatever the relationship, it seemed that Kasey and Andi were using their Saturday to collect wheat for Kasey's floral arrangements, because they arrived at the door with their arms full of bunches of it. Kasey had a rash on her forearms because she had allergies, most inconvenient for a florist, and probably needed to combine hay fever meds in order to wander the fields like she'd been doing. Pan led them in to see Florrie's German computer. I think she set it to German to practice before she went away, she explained, but I can't read that, so I need it changed back. I can read it, replied Andi. Pan looked at her in surprise. Really? She opened the browser. Can you see the bookmark for the ferret food shop? Andi pointed it out and translated some of the text. Then Kasey reset the language because Pan mostly trusted Andi, but she wasn't sure she should buy things via a translator. The automatic feeder for Wurst was unfortunately not the only thing in the house that Pan suspected was not serving its intended purpose. While she had company, she thought it might be easier to tackle the wardrobe in the spare room. Florrie's accusations of Pan filling it with herbs were not untrue. She had been trying to dry her own for months now to use in her tea blends, and several previous batches had unfortunately gone mouldy rather than drying successfully. It gave the wardrobe a unique musty smell that Pan associated with her grandmother's kitchen dresser and most other people associated with things you should not eat anymore. The problem was that Pan had assured Florrie with great confidence last month that this batch of herbs would not go mouldy because she had put dishes of bicarb soda in with them, and this would absorb the moisture. She had realized a couple of weeks ago at this point that she had in fact been mixing up bicarb and desiccant in her mind. The bicarb might be absorbing the smell of the latest unfortunate batch of wilting plants, but it wouldn't be preventing them from following in the footsteps of the previous compost. Pan had, given Florrie's upsetting speech on the matter, not managed to own up to this, or indeed look to see what the situation in the wardrobe was. She confided this to an amused Kasey and Andi, who agreed to take a look together. The herbs, to the credit of the bicarb, did not smell bad, but they did look bad. Slimy leaves that had fallen, making brown marks on the floor, and those still hanging covered in an assortment of coloured spots and blackened bits. Andi looked at the back of the wardrobe. "Oh," she remarked, "that's your problem." She pointed to a vent-like opening in the wood. "That should be opening onto an area with ventilation, but my guess is this actually backs onto your bathroom or laundry and you're getting some moisture through." "Why didn't somebody tell me this sooner?" Pan seethed. Pan uttered similar words again later that evening, when she opened the middle drawer in the kitchen and found the collection of 59 desiccant sachets that Florrie had been saving for her out of various food packaging, but had neglected to mention. Wurst went into the spare room and rolled in the slimy fallen herb leaves, and Pan had to repeat the process of bathing him. Pan thought for a while that she and Wurst would never be friends again. But a few days later, his new bags of ferret kibble arrived. They were in a box far larger than necessary, and packed around the bags of kibble inside were hundreds of tiny shreds of cardboard, enough to fill most of the recycling bin in one go. At first, Pan despaired looking at the package. The bins, having already been filled with numerous bits of clutter that weren't in good enough condition to give to charity, plus all the mouldy herbs and boxes that housed the house junk, were already full to the brim. But then she pulled the new bags of food out. Wurst came zooming over. This unpacking procedure had happened before, and he must have known it to lead to food. Pan gave him a small amount of the fresh kibble and put the rest securely away. Then she stood looking at the blasted packaging, wondering what to do. Wurst admitted grudgingly to himself at this point that Pan did at least bring just as much food to him as Florrie did. Therefore, despite being a bath-bringing demon, she was on equal footing with the other human. He refrained from running up her leg and hissing at her, and instead went over to investigate what she was looking at. It was a big cardboard cube of a height that he could definitely jump into. In Wurst's experience, these usually had empty space on the inside and were good for making holes in and rolling about. He leapt over the side and found himself instead in the most excellent sort of chunky sand. The paper stuff inside gave way when he burrowed in it, but supported his weight just enough so he didn't sink to the bottom. He dug and flipped and tumbled his way to the surface, leaping out and falling back in again to dive and dig through the magical snow. Pan couldn't be so bad if she brought him toys like this. Best present ever. Pan watched the ferret leaping and tumbling through the cardboard pieces and giggled as he vanished and reappeared. Okay, she mused. I see what you like. She went and retrieved some other boxes that had been set out by the recycling and reinforced them on some of the sides with tape, flattening the other ends so that she could join them. Then she set about shredding all of the other cardboard she could find and filled the box trough with the chunks. Finally, she added the box Wurst was still playing in and spread the shredded bits along the full length, setting the ferret bowl pit along one side of the hallway with a kitchen stool at one end as an improvised diving platform. Florrie would probably never be Wurst's preferred human again. On Kasey's actual birthday, she and Andi came over to see Pan for dinner and have a video chat with Florrie. Pan's guests sidled past the ferret bowl pit in the hallway and made their way into the dining room, where Pan had set up her laptop on one end of the table, along with a cake for Kasey and the birthday bunting she'd found in the bottom of the lounge room drawers. The laptop was set back so that Florrie could see that the table was clear of Pan's teapot collection, which now stood in a neat row on top of the chest of drawers in her own room. Florrie surveyed the room with obvious admiration when she answered the call, saying something in German to Ada, who was looking over her shoulder and who nodded in apparent agreement. Florrie apologized for her inability to take part in the charity run, and Kasey told her she was forgiven, although Pan thought Florrie looked a little bit relieved. Before long, the day of the 5-kilometre fun run arrived. The forecast was for hail, and one by one, the few others who had agreed to run with Kasey withdrew, citing the terrible weather, saying it would surely be postponed. But it was not postponed, and Pan did not rescind her offer to take part. She had put up her hand for this, and although she'd done so reluctantly, she wouldn't back out now. She did not quit, especially when she'd woken up in the dark and trained for this under Kasey's demanding personal trainer, Tone, for several weeks. She put on a waterproof with spider webs and ghosts on it over her sparkly purple leggings, and she met Kasey at the agreed spot, holding her head high despite raindrops hitting her in the face. The challenge is the whole point, Kasey remarked, looking up as well. Really, the worse it is, the bigger the achievement, right? Answered Pan. They made their way to the check-in point and got their numbers from a cold-looking official who put ticks next to their names on a list that had a lot of lines through it. Then they bunched up at the starting line with a crowd of other extremely determined people in waterproof jackets and hoods, and in some cases sunglasses, which Pan thought was a bit optimistic of them. For the hail, Kasey explained, seeing Pan looking, so it doesn't hit you in the eyes. She got out some clear plastic safety glasses and offered Pan a pair. Great thinking, Pan murmured. It continued to merely rain for the first 2 kilometres, and whilst she was soaked, Pan wasn't cold because she was running, so that wasn't so bad. She found to her great surprise that she liked the determined atmosphere of all the people running in a mass against the rain. There was something exhilarating about it that made her want to keep going far more than just having Kasey's coaching in her ear did. At around 3.5 kilometres in, it did hail, but Pan kept running. She put on the glasses Kasey had given her and let the little bits of ice bounce off of her waterproof. They weren't large enough to hurt if she put the hood up. Pan pretended she was an elf running with her fantasy comrades on some sort of mission. What the mission was changed shape every 50 metres or so, but all of them inspired her, and the hail soon stopped. And then, after what seemed like no time, and at the same time like hours, she saw the finish line ahead. And Pandora did something she never would have guessed or planned. She sprinted for it. I did it! I did it! She shouted to whoever would listen, high-fiving strangers and bouncing up and down. Kasey found her at the drinks tent, wrapped in a towel branded with the Fun Runs logo and sipping a Powerade. Sorry for dragging you into this, Pan, Kasey coughed out. Chilly air and Kasey's lungs were not the best of friends. Running with a group is horrible. You just can't pace yourself. And in this, she gestured to the sky. Don't know what I was thinking. Never again. Remind me if I ever ask you. Pan shook her head, laughing. No, thank you for inviting me. I loved it. It's so different being amongst a crowd like that. I didn't know running could feel so communal, inspiring. She shrugged. I guess I have to tell everyone I lied about hating it now. Kasey looked at Pan as though she'd never seen her before. Finally, it came to Florrie's return date, and Kasey and Pan went to get her from the airport together. She's not going to believe me when I say you liked the run, Kasey remarked as she pulled into the short stay parking. I know, Pan laughed. Hey, I was wondering, did you ask Andi to do the run with you? Kasey shrugged. Nah, I don't know her that well yet. I just asked the usual people, you know. But she loves running, Pan told her. She was talking to me about it like the second time we met. What? Kasey spluttered, turning off the ignition and swiveling to face Pan. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Oh my God, we could have been training together. Pan rolled her eyes. Maybe if you asked her a few things, she would have told you. Kasey glared at her. When they got back to Florrie and Pan's house, Florrie stopped in the hallway. Pan, why do we have a huge box full of about 1 million tiny pieces of cardboard? Pan grinned. Watch. She went and let Wurst out of the laundry. The ferret shot along the hole, leapt onto the kitchen stool, dived into the cardboard, and proceeded to joyfully tumble about. Okay, Florrie grinned. He's the worst, but that is pretty cute. Pan led the way into the tidy dining room, where she'd set the 3D puzzle reassembled on the mantelpiece, and tidied away all the other clutter except for Florrie's vase, which held one of Kasey's masterful arrangements. Wow, Florrie managed, dropping into a chair. It's neat. She reached out and almost touched the 3D puzzle sculpture, then thought better of it. You know, I almost miss a little bit of Pandora's chaos. Pan glared at her. Don't you dare. Kasey's plant swap barbecue was 2 nights later. Florrie and Pan walked over to arrive at a time they expected to be early, to find that Andi was already there, helping Kasey put up a marquee in the field behind her house. Spanner, the golden retriever, ran to greet them, jumping all over Florrie and slobbering on her knee. Florrie set down Kasey's promised climbing rose cuttings. Happy belated birthday, she said, smiling. We can celebrate double tonight. Kasey looked confused. Oh? Pan laughed. Today's actually my birthday. Kasey stared at her. Oh my God, why didn't you tell me this sooner? We could have done something more you. Pan grinned. Don't worry, there's nowhere I'd rather be. She shrugged. Plus, lately, I seem to like things I thought I hated, so who knows what more me would actually be anyway. At least Florrie and Ada got you an amazing present, right? Andi interjected, coming over. Florrie waved her hands at her. Shh, it's a surprise. I was going to do that later. She frowned. Hold on. Andi, how on earth do you know that? Pan's eyes flicked back and forth between them, trying to make sense of it. Oh, she smiled. The video call. What about the video call? Florrie asked, looking perplexed. You said something to Ada in German that Kasey and I ignored, but Andi speaks German. Florrie spun around to look at Andi, her mouth dropping open. Warum hast du mir das nicht früher gesagt? An intense-sounding exchange in German ensued, and then Andi went with Florrie around the back of Kasey's house. When they returned, Andi had something on a sack truck, covered up with a shawl which Pan had intended to throw out, and Florrie had a large rectangular object wrapped in a sheet of brown paper Pan was pretty sure came from the packaging of one of Wurst's tunnel kit toys. Sorry, I didn't really get a chance to make these look pretty, Florrie chuckled. But she handed Pan the package she was holding. This is to provide an alternative to the spare wardrobe. She turned to Andi, and they turned the shawl-covered object on its side. And this is to, hopefully for the immediate future, provide enough space to make up for me wanting a clear dining table and kitchen cupboards. Pan cautiously unpicked the tape on the brown paper and wrestled with the object. It was heavy. She set it down on Kasey's outdoor table to pull the paper away, revealing an electric food dryer. For a moment, she just blinked at it. A bit better than desiccant, she managed after a moment. Florrie laughed. Pan knelt to pull the shawl from the object at Andi's feet. An intricately carved, long wooden chest, big enough to sit comfortably across the foot of her bed, stared back at her. She swallowed. Just to be clear, Florrie, are you giving me these amazing things so I can set up my own house, or... Florrie snorted. No, Pan, you twit. I'm giving you these things so you can make the Pandora's chaos in my house just a tiny bit less chaotic. She paused. I'm inviting you to stay, Pan, because I never officially did. So now if you make chaos and I don't like it, it's at least a little bit my own fault. Pan got up and went to give her a hug. But after a moment, she pulled back, eyeing Florrie with the sternest face she could muster. Florrie, before I agree to this officially, I have a very important question. Florrie's mouth made a worried straight line. What? Why? And please consider your answer carefully. Why do we have in our kitchen not one, not two, but 3 jars of instant coffee? Florrie pursed her lips. You said our kitchen. If they're yours, Pan trailed off ominously. Florrie snorted. You're so ridiculous. She shook her head. You remember Nat? Yeah. He brought them in one day with some other groceries, making out like it was some sort of meaningful gesture and he'd be moving in soon. Pan's nostrils flared. The worst. Yet never again. Worse than Wurst, Pan added. Then, what did you say to him? She pulled a face. Nothing, Florrie replied. I sent him into the spare room wardrobe, pretending I needed something there. He came out looking scared and he never came back. Pan made a face. My bad. Nah, Florrie shrugged. I knew what was in there. My chaos, said Pan with a flourish of her shawl. Exactly, Florrie grinned. Pandora's chaos.
Oh, beautiful. That was fun. And touching also.
When you were saying about things that you didn't think you liked that you do and capers, see, I was thinking, for me, olives were one of them that I didn't used to and now I do. But I also, in my late 20s, about 1 week a year, I listened to country music. It was always the genre that people kind of like, oh, country music's weird and silly or whatever. You know, a lot of people look down on it. And so I feel like a good title for something would be like Capers and Country.
Yeah, meaning like those things that like you maybe only like at a specific time or like occasionally. Yeah. They're kind of an acquired taste in.
Yeah.
Are there any other requests for next time for October?
I think you could add in the best gift ever. You know how
Wurst,
the
box.
the best gift ever when it's not really quite what you intended. That's lovely.
Yeah. So sort of like specifically when something is not really intended as a gift, and it's the best gift ever. Yeah. And anything else? Any other requests for next time? We've got lots of people missing today, so I'll put out a call in the chats as well for any more. But if there's anything you're thinking of at the moment, any characters you'd like to see?
See, my main theme for the month, which I don't know how you'd put in with the tone of the stories that you like to write, but maintaining boundaries with your workplace.
Oh dear.
But yes, as I was having to, respond to various requests from my workplace, but then also at the same time dealing with the group projects for uni where no one turns up and you're like, cool. Yay.
Like the opposite problem.
Yes.
Where, like no one's really cares and is not being motivated to do the work. Yeah.
Maybe group projects would be a good idea.
Group projects.
Yeah. There's a lot there actually.
Yeah.
Do they ever work?
Yeah.
Adding doing things with mirrors, Sarah.
Oh yeah.
Story,
like your birthday candles.
Had a sheet of
That's right. We're trying to get the birthday candles. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. It's really hard working with things that are like mirror image. Yeah.
Just going to say in relation to the story today, that thing of Pam going, actually, it's nice being out here in this extraordinary weather.
Yeah.
I was walking the other day and our weather was changing. It wasn't raining or anything particularly, but the wind was just ferocious. And, quite often I actually really dislike walking in the wind. But I thought, actually, if you kind of detach a little bit, you can view it like the sound of distant ocean. And there was something incredibly calming about walking with the grass kind of flattening and rippling and stuff.
I do love that. I love watching like a field of grass or crop in the wind. That's beautiful. The way it moves is lovely, but the wind typically causes me all sorts of problems.
I quite like walking in the wind. It feels like invigorating.
Yeah.
If it's cool, if it's 43, it's revolting.
Not hot wind.
Oh, yeah. You don't want it to be close to 0 or close to 40. Like, you want it to be like a reasonable temperature in between. But then it's like, I don't know, like I feel the energy of the air around me. Like,
something really interesting.
Yeah, I can see how that. Like, we had this wind one time in Southampton that was like, I felt as though I could do like a Mary Poppins, like it was going to actually lift me up. And
you want to jump
really
and see if you can fly.
Lean on it. Like, if I leaned into the wind and kept leaning forward, I felt that I wouldn't fall over because the wind was that strong. Definitely felt that it could knock me over as well. The big gust, I'd have to sort of hang on to Lloyd or grab onto a pole or whatever.
I think it's something like, it was a bit like if you are immersed in water, like you're diving and you're under the water, there's this extraordinary calm. Normally created, by silence, I guess, or very muted sound, but that kind of extreme shushing of the wind kind of had the same effect. It was quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then
I like to also think about the feel on your skin. So when you're walking through water, you feel the particles against your skin and the pressure of it. And wind, you get a similar thing. Like, so in my mind, I'm like imagining air as having a thickness as I'm walking through it. And on a normal day, you can't always feel it. But sometimes when the barometric pressure changes a bit, or if it's windy, then like, I guess it's kind of a mindfulness thing where I'm just like, I'm kind of feeling through my body the pressure of the air, which you normally can't feel. And that's really weird. And it like,
it's nice.
You ever listen to those like relaxation sounds that are like nature sounds?
Yeah.
Like rain or thunderstorm or waves. Because I was watching a documentary at the local documentary festival here, and there was one about like, it was like a nature one, and there was a lot of like waves of water, and I was like, I'm really enjoying this, but I feel really tired. And I was like, and I realized it's probably because I just associate all those sounds with falling asleep.
With a bit like relaxation.
So I was like, I'm not finding it boring, but I feel like I want to go to sleep. I was really confused.
It's like when in my psych degree we had a whole series by the sleep specialist guy who did research at our uni, and so he'd be talking about sleep, and I don't know whether he had practiced having a voice that was calming and would put people to sleep because it was useful in his laboratory setting, but when he was giving a lecture, the number of people who would be falling asleep, not people who fell asleep all the time in lectures, like I would find that I was getting drowsy listening to this particular professor.
Right. You have to have a left field one then. I reckon you should have one in there about cables. Yeah, how you never have the right cable to attach.
Yeah, we know. Everything needs an adapter. Yeah.
This needs that. You've got to have this, and that goes into this, or it won't plug into that.
Yes. All right. I'll add cables. Some sort of cable chaos.
Cable chaos.
And if you think of anything else, I'll pop that list in the chats, and then if you come up with anything else that you'd like, you can let me know in one of those, and I'll add to the list as we go. And I said, I think October 14th, isn't it?
14th, yeah.
Yes, 14th. So I'll see you October 14th, 7:30 for those in Adelaide, as opposed to 6:30 this time. So remember that. And feel free to send me more topics to put in as we go on with the month. Thanks for
Great.
joining
See you
us.
later.
See you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sarah.